Question 4.
To the Minister of Finance, does she stand by all her statements and actions?
The Honourable Nicola Willis.
Well, Mr. Speaker, yes. In particular, I tend to make the same statement to one audience as I do to another, unlike that member who took so many positions on PPPs last week that she ended up by having to apologise for the confusion she'd caused.
Supplementary. Does she agree with Nicola Willis, who said in October 2023 that the government, quote, will never hit surplus and debt will blow out even further than it is today, unquote, when she has shifted surplus out, will not deliver in the forecast period, and debt is growing under her watch?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I stand by all my statements, and I welcome this turn of fiscal prudence from the Labor Party, in which suddenly, for the first time, that member, instead of encouraging me to get out the money hose, is saying she cares about debt and surplus. Stick to those guns, Barbara.
Look, the Minister of Finance knows referring to someone by the first name is not appropriate in this House. Their full name, if at all. The Honourable Barbara Evans.
Does she agree with Nicola Willis, as reported by the media in July 2022, that, quote, the government could not keep blaming external events, unquote, and if so, why is she now concerned with international headwinds?
Could the member repeat the first part of the question, please?
Does she agree with Nicola Willis, as reported by the media in July 2022, that, quote, the government could not keep blaming external events, unquote, and if so, why is she now concerned with international headwinds?
Absolutely, Mr. Speaker, because under the last government, what we had was a spending approach which was so excessive compared to other countries around the world that now numerous studies have shown that our inflation went higher and stayed higher for longer, that our interest rates needed to soar higher to control that. And that was not a result of global factors. It wasn't global factors that made every former minister sitting opposite me spend like a drunken sailor on bureaucrats, go nowhere projects, wasted initiatives. It was your government that chose to do it. It drove up inflation and it caused real pain for New Zealanders.
Okay, I'm just going to say this once before anything else comes. So standing order to make it very clear, the government cannot use its own questions or answer questions that are an attack of the opposition. They can refer to matters that affect their portfolio, but not an out-and-out attack that might be more in the nature of a public meeting somewhere. So we've just got to calm things down a little bit. By the same token, beg your pardon? By the same token, questions that invite political comparison, for example, asking a member effectively if they agree with themselves is virtually like saying, I've got you here, then it's going to get some sort of answer along the lines of the one we just had. Very difficult to walk the balance between the two. The Honourable Barbara Evans.
Does she agree with Nicola Willis that, quote, we have Minister of Finance? Does she agree with the Minister of Finance that we have huge amounts of government debt? Or does she agree with her statement at the International Investment Summit that, quote, we have relatively low levels of government debt compared to other countries, unquote?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, another set of wise statements by Nicola Willis, because on the one hand, the previous government added more than $100 billion to debt with just about nothing to show from it, which I believe was pretty reckless. And on the other hand, Mr. Speaker, because of the great work by Sir Bill English and other prudent National Party finance ministers, our debt had started in a low position, and so it ended up in a lower position than some other countries. But if that lot had stayed in, I can guarantee you this, the debt would have got out of control.
Supplementary. Why did she tell the International Investment Summits that, quote, we need more capital investment, unquote, while cutting back government investment into schools, hospitals and housing?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the member should be very cautious before she makes statements in this House that cannot be backed up by the facts, and I would sincerely ask her to go back Look at the words she used in that question and see if she can find factual verification for them, because this is a government that in its first budget invested more money in school buildings, invested more money in transport infrastructure, invested more money in housing, such that we have added more than 4,000 public homes since we came to office, such that we have added more classrooms, we have built more schools, and we have more than $6 billion worth of roads under construction. So get your facts right.
Oh, that's untrue. Nasty. Every time. Too easy.
Just wait for your own colleagues who are holding things up.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker.
Just a little bit of time here. All right.
Supplementary. Why is it that she says one thing about the government's books to international investors, but is more than comfortable to say the complete opposite to the New Zealand public?
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is like Patsy Hour. I've given the member the answer, and I'll give it to you again, which is this. On the one hand, we had years of prudent fiscal management, including by Sir Bill English, who managed to get debt down to extremely low levels. We then had the spendthrift days of the Labour government, who brought that debt up to 40% of GDP. And Mr. Speaker, because we started from a good base because of the prudent work of previous national governments, that meant that relatively our debt is still quite low compared to some countries in the OECD. But I would caution the member this. New Zealand is a country that is prone to significant economic shocks, be they climatic events, be they seismic events, be they trade-related events. And so it has been the long-standing position of both Labour and national-led governments that it makes sense to keep our debt at low levels. And if the member wishes to depart from that long-standing consensus, I would suggest to her that most New Zealanders would not agree.
Just a point, the right honourable speaker, just a minute. Look, a question like that will get a response like that, which makes it very difficult to apply in its strictest sense standing orders. The right honourable Winston Peters.
Can I ask the Finance Minister as to how she's been able to deal with the much vaunted promised economic recovery by mid-2024 of growing GDP, higher wages, higher incomes, higher housing, and the actual facts that she had to deal with when she found out the truth?
Well, the Deputy Prime Minister makes a very good point. I think it is highly regrettable that the previous government made promises that it had put in place strong economic foundations that would lead to recovery and job creation. The facts are clear. Actually, what they left was record inflation, soaring interest rates, and a crushing effect on the economy, which has led to a very high cost of living for New Zealanders, destroyed jobs, and taken this economy backwards. And we, on this side of the House, are fixing it.
The Honourable Barbara Emmons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Finance, does she agree that the Treasury is the government's lead economic and financial advisor? If so, does she have confidence in advice from the Treasury?
The Honourable Nicola Willis.
Mr. Speaker, in answer to the first part of the question, yes. And I also take advice from a range of other agencies and advisors, including the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, on economic issues. In answer to the second part of the question, in general, I do have confidence in advice from the Treasury. However, that does not mean they always get everything right. And like many previous Ministers of Finance, I do not always agree with Treasury's advice. I do not believe my role as the Minister of Finance is to be a rubber stamp for the Treasury, and it is safe to say that I am not one.
Supplementary. Does she agree with Right Honourable Winston Peters' characterisation of statements made in the context of Treasury's pre-election fiscal update as being a, quote, litany of lies, unquote, and if so, what was factually incorrect in the pre-election fiscal update?
Absolutely.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I seldom have cause to disagree with Deputy Prime Minister Peters, and I have observed that the leader of the New Zealand First Party has a particular way with words.
Supplementary. Does she agree with the Right Honourable Winston Peters when he said the recent recession was, quote, deepest and longest economic downturn and recessionary retraction for over 3 decades, unquote?
Oh, absolutely.
Mr. Speaker, I agree that the recent period of economic history has done untold damage to households up and down this country, and the characterisation presented by Mr. Peters is one that is familiar to far too many households. A period of sky-high inflation, a period of debt accumulation by both the government and the private sector, a period of soaring interest rates, and a period of economic contraction and job loss. It's been a very painful time, and I think it would be a callous soul who would disagree with that.
Supplementary. Does she agree that the Treasury did not forecast a recession in the pre-election fiscal update? And does she accept that the recession only occurred in 2024?
Mr. Speaker, the Treasury got its forecasts before the election plain wrong.
The Right Honourable Mr. Peters.
Could I ask the Minister of Finance if the preview of September 2023 did not, for example, disclose the IREX blowout in terms of the ferries, which happened 9 days later, and there are countless fiscal cliffs like that? How on earth could it be possibly honest as a forecast of the future?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the pre-election fiscal update reflected both inaccurate forecasts and the poor fiscal habits of the previous government, which included fiscal cliffs, short funding, and doing all sorts of things to make the books look better than they actually were.
Supplementary. How is it that the Treasury did not forecast a recession prior to the election, but her government delivered what the Deputy Prime Minister called the deepest and longest economic downturn and recessionary traction for over 3 decades? And do you trust the Treasury advice now?
Because, Mr. Speaker, as I have just said, the Treasury got their forecasts wrong. As they themselves have acknowledged, they have had to steadily unwind the assumptions that they made during the term of the last government, which were over-optimistic. And, Mr. Speaker, what I take responsibility for is fixing the sheer economic carnage that was left to us by the last government.